Back in 2008, I visited the National Museum of the United States Air Force and I allocated 2 days to spend walking around photographing all the aircraft that I could in various locations and various angles. The F-106 Delta Dart is very similar to the Royal Australian Air Force Dassault Mirage that holds a very soft spot in my life. Having watched The French Lady many times as a youngster, any Delta I see, immediately it gets my attention, no matter what the size, depending on whether it's a tiny little thing like the Mirage or the giant Vulcan bomber. So what is the significance of the story, you ask? Well, normally aircraft such as this F-106 Delta Dart happily fly around the sky without no problems, take off, land, and everything is hunky-dory. Occasionally one of them might come a crop and the pilot or crew may need to eject. This is the basis of this story. It all begins on February 1970. The F-106, serial 58-0787, operated by the 71st Fighter Intercept Squadron, based at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, piloted by Lieutenant Gary Faust, was on a routine training flight as part of a 3-ship formation conducting air combat maneuvers. Lieutenant Gary Faust was in the lead with Major Jim Lau in the chase position. The third aircraft, piloted by Tom Curtis, was alone as a premature jag chute deployment on the ground meant that his wingman Larry McBride had to abort. Faust and Lau separated from Curtis after a 20-mile separation. The ground controllers turned all aircraft into a heading to intercept each other. Rules of engagement were set that they had to pass each other head-on with a separation distance of 1,000 feet. Once they had passed, with no tactical advantage to either flight, it was fight on. The objective from here was to get a valid firing position on the other. Curtis approached Faust at Mach 1.9, almost twice the speed of sound, ascending to a height of 38,000 feet. Both got into a vertical rolling scissors where Curtis gave Faust a high G rudder reversal. At this point, trying to stay with Curtis, Faust lost control and entered a post-stall gyration, which happens just prior to a stall. Despite trimming the aircraft back to neutral trim by taking his hands off the stick and selecting takeoff trim, which was the standard textbook recovery method, Faust was unable to regain control and found himself in a flat spin. This is considered generally unrecoverable in an F-106, and for the book basically says at this point to get out. At a height of 15,000 feet, Faust did just this and initiated the ejection sequence. As wingman, Major Jim Lau was closely following the events, actually contributing with instructions on the recovery procedures whilst observing. Lau noted that as the ejection seat fired, the kick from the ejection seat boosters pushed the nose down. With the reduction in weight change in the centre of gravity, the aircraft recovered itself and began to fly on its own accord. Due to the fact that the aircraft had been perfectly trimmed prior to ejection, the F-106 was now also flying perfectly level. Lau then advised Faust that he probably should get back in it. Both Lau and Curtis, happy that Faust was safe and sound, albeit dangling from a parachute, both set off to follow the now pilot-free F-106. Eventually under power, the aircraft started slowly losing height and finally landed in a snow-covered cornfield near Big Sandy in Montana. Shortly after, the local sheriff arrived to see a still-running F-106 sitting wheels up in the snow. It was still creeping slowly as the engines melted the snow, and it was on a slight incline with enough thrust to push the aircraft along. The sheriff made a call to the Air Force to ask how to turn it off, to which he was told to just let it run out of fuel, which is how it finally came to a full stop. This was probably the best answer the sheriff could have asked for, as he got back the shock of his life when the aircraft started to move under its own power while he was standing on the wing. A recovery crew from McClellan Air Force Base in California arrived to dismantle the aircraft for transfer back to base. The actual damage was minimal, and jokingly it was suggested that if there were any less damage they could have just flown it out. Eventually 58-0787 repaired and returned to service, where it continued operating with the 49th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, which was the final USAF unit to operate the F-106. On its retirement, it was presented to the National Museum of the United States Air Force, where it remains to this day. The story of 58-0787 became known as that of the Cornfield Bomber. Technically, it should have been called the Wheat Fighter, as it landed in a wheat field, and the F-106 is really a fighter interceptor, not a bomber, but why let the facts get in the way of a true and actual story? Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this little yarn about the F-106 that landed pilotless on its own and returned to service to see another day. If you did, please just leave a like. If you feel like it, feel free to subscribe as well.